Okay, here, let's do this right now while we're getting started, okay? Because once Mama and Catherine are talking, then
it's not a good idea for you to talk.
But you can.
It looks like this was automatically recording. Oh, Loie, I can't see you. What is that?
It's a chocolate chip granola bar.
Oh my gosh.
Are you gonna eat that one?
Yeah.
No? Can I eat it? Oh, goldfish? What flavor?
This is our box of restricted treats.
Oh.
So they're brought out for special occasions.
So Loie, your job during this meeting is you have to eat all of those treats. Okay? Can you do it? Hello everybody, welcome to our second meeting. We're just gonna give people like 2 minutes to arrive and 2 minutes for Loie to show us her snacks. Oh, there's the animal crackers. So I was wondering which brand. That looks like a fun one.
Yeah, these are from the Kroger.
Okay, nice.
Applesauce.
Applesauce, yeah, I like those. Although I find it weird to suck things out of pouches sometimes.
There's another. This is a peanut butter and jelly muffin, which I don't like.
Oh, okay. Well, Aurora can eat that, right?
These come with around the world cards, but they're super sour.
Oh, okay. So maybe, who likes those? Does Lauren like those?
These were an experiment. They've sat in the back and the bottom of the snack bin for, at this point, over a month.
Okay. Oh, geez. I don't know then.
You can try one.
I already got one.
Okay, Loie, show us which snack you're gonna eat now, and then I'm gonna share my screen.
The sour one.
You're gonna do it? Okay. That's like super adventurous. So we're just gonna see how that goes.
I already got this card, which is annoying.
Okay, here we go. I am going to share the screen. Lauren, do you see that?
I do. Okay, here. I'm just going to adjust. Hello. One thing. How about let's move you to this side so I can still use my mouse. Okay, so let's move your stool just to the other side of the computer. Okay.
I want to eat all of those.
You think you're really going to do that in an hour? You're going to get a tummy ache. At some point, you need to eat the grilled cheese too. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want to go upstairs and get the grilled cheese?
All right, everyone, welcome. This is week 2 of the Data Feminism reading group. We're super excited to have you here, coming on the heels of last week's really amazing meeting, which resulted in a big Google Doc and a couple of other things which we're going to talk about. So this week we're talking about chapter 1, because we talked about the introduction last week. And just quick housekeeping as a reminder that these sessions are all recorded and you can check our website. And so in case you ever miss one, you can go back and watch the recording, which we post as soon as we can, maybe, you know, a day or 2 after the actual event. And I see my hair is coming in and out of focus, so that's kind of cool. I'm gonna have different hairstyles the whole time. So Lauren, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I am joined by my little companion over here who's eating lunch. Hopefully we'll get through whatever week this has been of quarantine. We thought last week was pretty bad, but this week is worse than whatever last week was. So we're at the whatever it takes phase. We wanted to start, as we do each week, with an Indigenous land acknowledgement, and I'll just read it for you. Though please don't climb behind the computer. That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. Remember, last time you knocked the computer over. So in exploring and writing about the imagined foundations of a society and culture, we feel it necessary to acknowledge. Hey, Lo, if you're going to be here, you need to be quiet and not distracting, okay? We feel it necessary to acknowledge the very real foundations of our own. We therefore acknowledge the Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land where this event is taking place, and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land that we are on today is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation, and where Catherine is located, and the Muskogee Creek people, where I am located. We acknowledge this painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather and perform from time immemorial. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. So a couple of people at the end of last meeting suggest that we start an asynchronous channel for chatting, for keeping in touch between reading groups. So one suggestion is the idea of doing a collaborative document, but maybe not on Google Docs. And we, Catherine and I feel like this should sort of come from you all, the people who are listening. So maybe something like Rise Up, or someone suggested cryptpad.fr. I'm not familiar with that one, anyway, we'd love to be invited if someone does this, but we are not going to take the lead on this one. A couple of other notes, just there's a reading group, just a Google Doc where people's names and locations and affiliations and Twitter handles are being shared. You can see the link up over on the top right. And then there's also a Data Feminism reading group list on Twitter. And you can get in touch with Beto Live to be added. So that is that. And just we just sort of wanted to shout out the people who are responsible for our Zoom backgrounds, hiding, in my case, the cumulative detritus of the end of the semester. And those people are Ezra Royce, who did Catherine's, and Ori Komatani, who did the cover of our book, which is what is behind me. Okay. So just, as we said last week, the outline of the reading group is, in general, it's pretty straightforward. Each week we're going to be talking about one chapter, and each chapter corresponds to one principle of data feminism. And today we're going to be talking about the first of these principles, which is examining power.
Why is that recording?
It's recording so that people who can't watch right now can watch it later. So you're going to be on the internet for a very long time. So
Yay.
be well behaved.
You're famous, Loie.
Okay, so here is our principle. The principle is examining power, and the principle is pretty short and to the point. Data feminism begins by examining how power operates in the world. And so last week we spent a lot of time talking about more generally the need for an intersectional approach to feminism. And we emphasized in that discussion how the idea of intersectionality didn't just refer to the intersecting aspects of a person's identity, but rather the intersecting forces of power that in turn result in individuals experiencing the effects of certain privileges on the one hand, and then the effects of certain oppressions on the other. And so, this idea of intersectional feminism and also power, they're very closely related, sort of in general, and for the book, and for the idea of data feminism. And so as we were drafting the first chapter, which interestingly, if you're reading along off of the draft version, it was actually the last chapter in the draft. But in response to some of the peer review, we thought it would be like the culminating, and ta-da, here you go. But people sort of said, like, if this is a book about power, it should be first. So that's one of the major changes. So if you're a little bit, if you're trying to sort of sequence the draft back in with the final version,
Mama,
that may help you. That's a video, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, so you should listen. We may watch it, we may not. So as we were drafting this first chapter, which, as I just said, is focused on power, we wanted to foreground the experience of someone who encapsulates this idea of intersecting forces of privilege and oppression happening at the same time. So if you recall back from the first chapter, we quoted Patricia Hill Collins saying, there are very few sort of pure victims and pure oppressors. And, this is this is something that we really want to reinforce, right? Everyone experiences, for the most part, a little bit of both. And so the person who we decided to focus on is Serena Williams. And the story we tell about her, is her experience giving birth to her daughter, Olympia. And I feel like Serena and I are like BFFs because my younger daughter, not this one, has a very similar birth date to Olympia. And so while Serena was posting all of her Instagram pregnancy updates, I secretly was, I felt very, like we shared a bond. She doesn't know this, it's one way, but that's how I feel.
Has the same birthday as who?
Serena Williams' baby was born very close to Aurora's birthday.
But you're born very close to Aurora.
That's true. That's true. Olympia and my daughter and I have very similar birthdays, but not in the same year. Okay, so this may take a little bit longer than anticipated because of this peanut gallery off to my side.
A peanut gallery.
Okay, so professional phase. Many people now know that Serena Williams actually experienced fairly life-threatening complications in childbirth. She had an underlying blood clotting condition, and she knew it. And she actually knew that she was experiencing a complication relating to that, but the doctors in the hospital didn't believe her at first over the course of several days. And she had to insist that she get this particular kind of test that would show what she felt herself and knew herself to be experiencing. And they eventually performed this test, and they discovered, sure enough, she was found to be having this issue that she had known all along that she was having. And because of the test, which confirmed her experience, she received the blood thinners or whatever it was, and she lived instead of dying. And then she brought home her cute baby, who we can now follow on Instagram. But that's sort of only part of why we tell the story in the book. The other part of the story has to do with what happened after she got home. And it sort of begins with this video, which we're actually not going to play because streaming video on Zoom is pretty bad. But if you Google, here, let me see if I can find it for you. Here it is right here. I'm going to paste it in the chat. So you can actually probably watch this as I'm talking. We cannot watch it at the same time because I'll show it to you a little bit later, but I can tell you what happens. It's really cute. It's a photo and video montage created by Serena Williams and her partner, Mama, Alexis Ohanian. What?
Why do they always have like that thing that looks like a boomerang on their head?
I am not entirely sure, and maybe someone in the chat window knows. I thought they were trying to show that they were brainy, but maybe that's the wrong interpretation of it, and I'm missing a major cultural reference point. So it sort of proceeds over the course of Serena's pregnancy, shows all of her bump pics and some cute little interactions between the two of them. And then towards the end, just as it finally shows you some live video and the first glimpse of baby Olympia. And it's a clip from Serena leaving the hospital. And she says something sort of even in passing. She says, we had a lot of complications, but look who we got. And then, the video ends with cute little stats about the baby that are analogous to Serena's tennis stats. And it was supposed to be sort of like a heartwarming story, which for the most part it is. But when Serena posted the video on Instagram, a lot of women took note of that little throwaway line about the complications, and they started commenting with all of their experiences of like childbirth gone horribly wrong. And Serena started to notice this pattern. It was a lot of women, and it was a lot of Black women in particular. And sort of unbeknownst to her fans, Serena had actually already begun doing research on the subject, and what she discovered, and she actually reported back on this on social media a few weeks later, was that there was significant evidence pointing to the fact that Black women experience far worse outcomes in childbirth than white women do. And this is true even when controlling for things like income level and education level, which are sort of the other factors that are usually used to sort of explain away essentially structural racism. But even in the course of doing this research, she found that there still wasn't enough data to fully document the scope of the problem. So how many Black, Chloe, please, you gotta stay calm, okay? It's really not helpful to be doing this. Okay, yeah, Mama's trying to talk about a serious issue, okay? And it's about kids, so please give me a little bit of respect. It is about kids. So the question of like how many Black women were actually dying and for what reasons? And despite some really excellent work being done historically and right now by Black-led reproductive justice groups, so these are groups like the Black Mamas Matter Alliance or Sister Song, Serena, she still couldn't find the detailed information she was seeking. And in the book, we quote a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Illinois, someone named Dr. Stacy Geller, who describes the state of maternal health data in the United States as, quote, embarrassing. But in the book, we point out that it's a little bit more than an embarrassment, right? This issue of missing data, this is a term that we'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, is at root a question of power, right? The data weren't collected because people in positions of power, so these are mostly white men working in government and at these well-resourced health institutions, just didn't believe that it was an important enough issue to collect data about. So this is just an example of this missing data that results from more general imbalance of power. Okay, so I am signing out for this. I'm going to put myself on mute and I'm going to hand it over to Catherine.
Lauren, I don't know if you've been monitoring the chat, probably not, but you're getting lots and lots of support. So basically like, 50 people have said, this is my life, and we can't believe Lauren can focus right now. So we open up with that story about Serena in chapter 1. And this is a way of introducing power and power in relationship to the data that we do and don't collect, power in relationship to data sets once they're manifested in the world, and also in relationship to what we do with data sets, how we process them, and what their disparate impacts are on people. But we get this question, we've kind of gotten this question a couple of times, what are we talking about when we're talking about power? So just like last time when we defined feminism, we thought it'd be really helpful for us to spend a couple of minutes just really being specific about what are we talking about when we're talking about power. So here's our definition. So what we're talking about is actually structural oppression and structural privilege. So power is the current configuration of structural privilege and structural oppression in which some groups experience systematic advantages because the system has been designed by people like them for people like them. And then other groups experience systematic disadvantages because those same systems, and here we might be talking about data-driven systems, but we also may be just talking about like our institutions. We're not designed by them or with people like them in mind. And one thing that's important to keep in mind, we are talking about like sort of group level advantages and disadvantages, which are unfair. But as Lauren reminded us earlier, Patricia Hill Collins says there's very few pure victims and pure oppressors. So Collins has this really nice way, this concept of salience, that certain things, certain kind of characteristics matter more in certain contexts. So, if I'm walking down the street holding the hand of my girlfriend, my sexuality may be sort of more salient in that particular situation. Whereas if I'm in a room full of male tech executives, my gender might be more salient in that particular context. So it's helpful not to just think about these in kind of, again, sort of false binaries, but thinking about how these manifest differently in different situations. And really at the root of, what we're talking about with structural privilege and structural oppression, this underlying concept here is Patricia Hill Collins' concept of the matrix of domination. And so we felt like this is just a very helpful way of thinking about how is structural oppression organized. That's basically what this is for. It's kind of like a taxonomy of different types of structural oppression. And so I'll go through this sort of quickly. We go through it in the book in relationship to the example of voting. But so in a way, at the most macro level, we have the structural domain. And in the structural domain, we can think of this as laws and policies. So wherever we have laws and policies that specifically inhibit or prohibit certain groups from doing certain things. So we talk about the 14th Amendment, which explicitly said that voting was only for male citizens. That's a great example of oppression in the structural domain. It's literally written into the law. But as many of us know, oppression happens not only from like our legal structures. And certainly like if we think about racism or something, you know, the ways that racism has transformed as we've written it out of law, it's seeped into other kinds of institutions. So here we can think about the disciplinary domain, which isn't necessarily the writing of law and policy, but it actually implements law and policy, or might be things like institutional norms or workplace policies. So policies where there's no place for women to go to breastfeed, for example, or policies where you can't take time off from your job to vote. This would be disciplinary domain oppression. The hegemonic domain is a third domain, which those of us who are in art, design, media, communications are probably deeply familiar with. This you can think of as culture, so the domain of culture. So this, again, it's not a kind of legal oppression, right? It's not discrimination through law or something like that. But this is the domain of culture that circulates oppressive ideas. And so this is where we inherit many of our false stereotypes about women, about Black women, about, you know, all manner of sort of harmful things that then go on to both affect us individually, but then also influence groups and how people think about groups. And then finally, at the individual level, we have the interpersonal domain. And so this is our individual experiences of oppression and how those manifest for us. So in the book, we talk about, you know, what would it feel like if one of your male family members gave you a deeply sexist pamphlet about how voting was only for men? How does that affect you personally? How does that make you feel when they're basically essentially some authority figure in your family is telling you that this is not your right or not your job or not your domain? And these are the things that we have sort of deep felt and embodied empirical experience with. And so the overall outcome of this matrix of domination is to uphold the privilege of dominant groups, who you can look at, you know, we'll talk about this a little bit more during this group today, but it really is dominant groups are the ones who are controlling most of the institutions in a society. And so what the matrix of domination does is it reproduces an unjust status quo while unfairly oppressing minoritized groups. And I think this is you, right, Lauren?
Okay, yes. So I always like to say this, that, you know, the matrix of domination isn't the only theory of how power works. You know, you can think of, you know, all sorts of philosophers and political scientists, like lots of people have ideas for how this works, but it is a feminist model for how power works, and in particular, a Black feminist model, in that it pays attention not just to sort of like generalized power, but these 4 specific ways in which power works with, and I think one of the main contributions is to look at not just the top down, but also the bottom up, and these individual experiences and these ideas that oppression and power sort of operate at the level of culture. So that's just sort of my like theory aside. So the reason why this is really helpful and why it's really helpful to have this theoretical model that guides your thinking is that it prompts you to ask more specific questions than just like, you know, I'm thinking of like the Monty Python, like, help, I'm being oppressed, right? It's like, you know, well, like beyond that, you know, how do you actually look for it so that you can understand it and hopefully mitigate or solve it? And so when you think about the matrix of domination and this idea of sort of upholding the privilege of dominant groups while unfairly oppressing minoritized groups, you're prompted to ask, or we think it prompts you to ask a couple of questions. So data science by whom? So who is doing the work of data science and then who is not? Data science for whom? So whose goals are prioritized in data science and whose are not? And then data science with whose values and interests in mind. So who benefits from data science and then who is overlooked or at times even actively harmed. So the first, and we're actually in the course of this talk today, we're going to go through examples of 3 of these, and we're going to start with this first one, which I'm going to pass back to Catherine.
Great. So this is one of our favorite segments, which is the favorite footnote. And so my favorite footnote from this segment, or from this chapter, has specifically to do with these who questions. So like data science by whom, data science for whom, with whose interests and goals. Like these who questions to me these are the feminist sort of power analysis that we can take and apply to sort of any given situation. But asking these who questions is something that Sarah Ahmed has written about, and it in a way is very uncomfortable. There's a reason these questions don't get asked in many domains, and if you are asking those questions, you often end up as this sort of figure that she names as the feminist killjoy. And so I'll read it, how she defines this. You might be a feminist killjoy if you have ruined the atmosphere by turning up or speaking up, or if you have a body that reminds people of histories that they find disturbing, or if you are angry because that's a sensible response to what is wrong. So the feminist killjoy exposes racism and sexism. Like, we ask these who questions, but to bring them up for people who are not otherwise sort of aware of racism and sexism, to bring them up is to bring them into existence. It's just, she has like this wonderful way of writing about this. And so, even just asking these questions can become uncomfortable, can make you a target, can, really break the norms of any given social situation. And then in the footnote, I tell a little bit of the story. I had one of these moments in the process of writing the book where I had a professor, somebody that I deeply respected, hear about the topic that we were writing about and told me that I shouldn't do it. That was just a bad career move. I should stay focused on data literacy and not become a grumpy feminist who was uncomfortable with her sexuality. And then he proceeded to explain feminism to me for like 10 minutes. And so, it's just we encounter these all the time. And I just wanted to like acknowledge that asking these who questions it's an uncomfortable act, but it's ultimately a kind of a muscle that we can start to develop, and then we can start to develop collectively. And as we develop it collectively, we can push for more change. Okay. Okay, so this question of data science by whom, here we bring up what we call like the elephant in the server room, which everybody knows already, but it just doesn't quite come always to the forefront of our conversations, which is that computer science and data science are fields that are extremely male dominated. So that's not surprising. The more surprising thing might be actually that the numbers are getting worse. So you can see a graph chart here from our book showing that actually we had more gender diversity, at least in the US context. We had more gender diversity in computer science in 1984 than we do today. And we have seen just basically a steady decline since then, which we are guessing is connected, as we talked about last week, to the rise in status of computer science and data science and artificial intelligence. And in terms of sort of intersectional characteristics, only 12% of graduates are Black or Latinx women, even though they make up 22.5% of the percentage of women, all women in the US. And then if you go into more narrow, sort of high status subfields like artificial intelligence, a report by AI Now showed that women are only 15% of AI research staff at Facebook. So not just all staff at Facebook, but only 15% of the overall AI staff, and only 10% at Google. So these are the folks who are making the most advanced systems and scaling those systems to folks around the world. Okay, so we have to ask these basic questions. And then, so what happens as a result of these kinds of disparities is work like Joy Bolamwini does. So we tell the story, so Joy Bolamwini is a colleague of mine from the MIT Media Lab. We tell the story of how, for a class project, she was working with face detection software. And she found that it couldn't actually see her face. It couldn't like detect that there was a face in front of the camera. And she sat down various colleagues of various races and ethnicities, and it recognized white colleagues, it recognized Asian colleagues, and couldn't recognize her face. And so she had a mask, this white mask that you see her wearing here, and she had it just sort of in her studio at the time, and put it on, and lo and behold, it saw her face. And so the interesting thing here then is Joy is a highly technical computer scientist, so she's like, okay, I'm getting to the bottom of this. And so she dove in and did an intersectional analysis of the training data, the benchmarking data sets that these algorithms are built on, and found, let me make sure I get these numbers right. Okay, yeah, found that the benchmark data sets that basically everybody uses as a standard are around 80% for one of the standard data sets, so 80% pale skinned, basically like white people, and 86% for another. And subsequently also showed that it was not only having sort of issues with skin tone, but also having issues with gender. And so they showed that darker skinned females are the most misclassified group. And so this leads us to the discussion of sort of what are the most harmful outputs. You know, so when we have a kind of professional domain that is dominated by only kind of very narrow group of people, what are the outputs? And also why, you know, we asked the question of like, why is the labor always on the people of color, the women, and so on, to actually discover these biases? Like, why don't these get caught earlier in the process? And why are we, you know, when Joy first started going out and talking about this, is like the mainstream media was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, we're so shocked that this is the case, you know? And so we also asked the question of like, why are these reactions like this as well? And so here, I'll turn it back over to Lauren, who will talk kind of how we name this phenomenon.
Yeah, so in the book, we have a name for the sort of general instance of this. We call it the privilege hazard. And Catherine, can you just advance the slide?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Thanks. Super. By this, we mean the phenomenon that makes those who occupy the most privileged positions among us so poorly equipped to recognize instances of oppression in the world. And so in the book, we sort of riff on Patricia Hill Collins, who does a version of this in Black feminist thought in a more general context. But we give the example of a person who epitomizes the dominant demographic of data science. So a straight, white, cisgender man with formal, usually fancy technical credentials who lives and works in the United States. So when he looks for a home or applies for a credit card, people are really excited to get his business. People smile when he holds his girlfriend's hand in public. His body doesn't change due to childbirth or breastfeeding, so he never really needs to think about workplace accommodations. You know, when he applies for a job, he gives them his social security number, but it's just a formality. It never sort of hinders his application from being processed or brings him unwanted attention. Just sort of this ease with which he traverses the world is just invisible to him because the world has been designed for people just like him, right? And he doesn't think about how life might be different for everyone else, primarily just because it doesn't occur to him to do so, right? He's not prompted to think about it, not like Joy was when the facial recognition software didn't recognize her face. And so this sort of leads to my favorite footnote in this chapter, which is another example like the facial recognition software of just sort of people not thinking about how the world might not work for people like them. So this is actually in the news maybe about a year ago because Amazon, you know, I guess at the time was being besieged by applications for jobs and they didn't have enough human power to process all of them. So they decided what they should do is automate the first round processing of the job applications, sort of decide who wouldn't even make the first cut. And they decided to develop some sort of algorithm in order to do it. And what they decided to do was some sort of machine learning model, and they had some training data, and they said, well, I have a great idea for training data. Why don't we train our algorithm on the resumes of people who work here? That seems like a great idea. You know, everyone who works here clearly is doing a good job, right? We hired them already. They haven't been fired, right? They all possess the characteristics that we think would make them great employees. Let's just take their resumes, feed it into this model, and then we'll be able to generalize a little bit about who makes a good employee. So they did this, and lo and behold, they discovered that it was discriminating against women applicants, against applicants of color, and other groups that were underrepresented in Amazon's existing workforce because the resumes that they drew from were only the resumes of like white men with fancy college degrees and whatever other criteria they had. And this actually prompted a lawsuit. And in the lawsuit, the legal team of the person who had been rejected from Amazon, they weren't able to get access to Amazon's proprietary model or system, but they were able to find a third-party job screening application system. And they did an audit of this one. And what they discovered when resumes from a range of types of people with different qualifications, the criterias that were most correlated with being rejected were having gone to a women's college. So just the name of your college, if it was a women's college, downgraded you in the ranking system. And the criteria that made you rated you the highest, most likely to be successful at this company was if your name was Jared and if you played lacrosse in high school. And so in the footnote, we talk a little bit about why this might be so. And it's like one of these things that's like, you can't make this up. As soon as you hear it, it's like an eye roll thing. But it's also, I think, really revealing as to, again, just sort of not thinking about how, like, of course, the very logical step to train an algorithm on future employees is on past employees. But if you don't stop to think, like, who are these employees, you end up amplifying the existing inequalities that are there. So anyway, so that's my favorite footnote from the project. Anyway, but it's not just a question of who is actually doing the work of data science. And this is actually really important, right? Because a lot of the times these calls for the calls about racism or sexism or other instances of oppression in the workplace tend to, people say like, well, if we just get the people who look like that doing the work, then they'll all go away. And that's actually not true. That's part of the problem, but it's or part of the solution, but not the entire solution. It's also a question to sort of bring it back to the example of Serena Williams. It's about who is affected by the particular situation or data science project at hand, right? So whose goals are prioritized in data collection efforts, data analysis projects, and so on, and then whose are not. So for instance, another health data project, we have a ton of data on erectile dysfunction drugs. You can search on PubMed and see like tens of thousands of search results that all link to studies. And we actually also have a ton of examples of data about pregnancy because it relates to abortion on the one hand, which men care about, and also to sales and marketing. It turns out, and I will confirm by my direct experience, pregnant people buy a lot of stuff. And we actually talk more about this on the chapter. But once the person gives birth and becomes a parent, we as a society don't really care about them anymore, or at least not enough to collect data or helpful data on them. And so anyway, so one of the main projects that we talk about in the book, which I say anecdotally was actually incredibly influential in us sort of shaping our sense of this general problem, is a project by the artist Mimi Onuoha. And it's her library of missing data sets. And this reflects this term that she's coined to describe this, these missing data sets. So what she means by this are data sets that a reasonable person might expect to exist because they address issues of pressing social need, but because of various reasons, they don't actually exist in real life. And so one version of Mimi's project is actually a GitHub repository, which you can see on the right. That's just a screenshot from it. And it's just a list of all of the missing data sets. Like you can see some of them, trans people killed or injured in instances of hate crime, or people excluded from public housing because of criminal records. So you can sort of read them, and because it's a GitHub repository, you can actually, if you think of a new one, you can submit a pull request and so on. But the project also exists as a physical artwork. It's a file cabinet with folders, each one with one of those little file tabs that's labeled with one of these same data sets. And the idea is that you tab through the folders and look at the labels, and you might see one that catches your eye. You're like, oh yeah, that seems like a really big problem. Let me see the data on that. And you open the folder and it's empty. And this is because the data set doesn't exist, right? It's missing. And as Onuoha explains in her artist statement, which you can also find on the GitHub repository, these missing data sets, quote, reveal our hidden social biases and indifferences. And by labeling them collectively as missing, what she's doing is calling attention to how, what we would say, the matrix of domination encodes these social biases and indifferences across all levels of society, right? So these data sets are missing because of the lack of personal will, a lack of social will, a lack of political will, and a lack of governmental will. So remember, those sort of correspond to the structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and interpersonal domains. So you might also think of data sets like the number of women dying in childbirth in the United States, right? So this is the missing data that Serena Williams encountered. And I've noticed people in the chat calling attention to some of the really great work that's been trying to sort of fill in that gap. But it is true that no national comprehensive database exists. It's all sort of piecemeal, even to date. Or another missing data set, like the number of people with COVID in the United States, right? So this is a very clear example of a data set that is missing because of deliberate political will, right? Like the federal government does not want this counted, and so they are not counting it. It's a little bit of an inverse, right? Because they're actively making data collection hard rather than just ignoring it. But and we'll talk a little bit about sort of there's nuances here, right? Like in not all cases, is more data the solution. Anyway, actually, I'll pass this to Catherine because I think you're going to cover some of this in your next example.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, on the missing data in relation to COVID, just a shout out to the group Data for Black Lives, who they've actually just started a national effort to push for all the different states in the US to collect data by race and ethnicity, because states are not collecting and not releasing data on COVID deaths by race and ethnicity. But what we can see so far is that there's huge racial disparities in how COVID is manifesting. So yeah, that's the one that's very present right now. But one of the examples of missing data that we talk about in the book has to do with the issue of femicides in Mexico. This is work by basically a citizen, Maria Salguero. And femicides, for those of you who don't know, are gender-related killings. They're what we call, in the US context, intimate partner violence that results in death, although that doesn't quite encapsulate it. In the context of Indigenous women, we say missing and murdered Indigenous women, but it's basically gender-based violence that results in death. And this is something that's really been talked about. It's been a huge source of public anger in Mexico and across Latin America. So if you check out the hashtag Ni Una Menos, which means not one less of us, not one less woman, you can see some of these, the tweets and folks who are talking about this. And femicide is actually defined legally. So like a number of different countries actually, including Mexico, actually have like a legal definition. They say that they want to work on it. They've taken some manner of steps, and yet they're not actually measuring the scope and scale of the problem. There are no reliable data, and certainly no reliable public data. And so it's into that kind of very uneven, asymmetrical data collection environment that Maria Salguero stepped about 5 years ago, where she basically was like, okay, I'm just gonna collect this data myself because the government is not collecting it. And so what she does is she logs feminicides from news articles. So she reads news articles. She has a number of different Google alerts set up. She reads articles from 2 to 4 hours a day. This is volunteer labor. This is like not her job. She doesn't even work for an NGO or activist group or anything like this. And then she determines whether each article is a femicide or not and logs this on her map. And through the sheer persistence of this work, her database has become one of the most widely cited and widely used. It is the most comprehensive public database of feminicide in Mexico. So she's actually been called in front of the Mexican Congress several times and testified. She's shared her data with journalists, and she's even helped family members locate their loved ones who had gone missing. And so this is one of those things where we talk about this and other projects as a form of feminist counter data. So kind of activist data collection that steps in when the state and other institutions have systematically failed to sort of do the basic job of measuring a problem that they've said is a problem, like they've even admitted this is a problem, but they're systematically sort of failing to measure the scope and scale, and then of course failing also to take action. And so it does represent one way to use data to challenge power as well. Okay, Lauren, I think I'll pass it back to you because this leads us to the third manifestation of the matrix of domination in data science.
Yeah, we're almost there. So this is sort of the third way, right? Catherine just said that. So far too often, the problem is not that data about minoritized groups are missing, but the reverse, right? That the databases and data systems of powerful institutions they're in fact built on the excessive surveillance of minoritized groups. And so this results in women, people of color, poor people, among any other examples you might cite, being overrepresented in the data that these systems are built upon. So when you ask this question, data science with whose values and interests in mind, who benefits and who is overlooked, this again sort of like opens up another set of questions to ask about these systems that we encounter in the world. Okay. So in the book, we characterize sort of this question of values and interests as being represented by the three S's. So it's sort of like a model for the political economy of data. So data are really expensive, right? So, or at least especially big data capture. So only certain kinds of actors like like universities, governments, corporations, have the resources to mobilize these data collection efforts at scale. So we end up as the situation in which the goals that these data fulfill are reflected in the goals of these large, powerful, and well-moneyed institutions. So they can be represented, so like as a generalization, in terms of science, surveillance, and selling, right? So this isn't like a normative judgment, like all science is bad, but rather stating that when resources are organized in this way, and these actors have all the money, that our data science will be incentivized towards the goals of these institutions and not towards other goals, and definitely not towards actually addressing the disparities caused by the matrix of domination in particular. So we just wanted to close a little bit with what data science with other goals and interests might look like.
Yeah, so we see this as a really powerful intervention point for a feminist data science. And so, you know, instead of science, surveillance, and selling being the things that our sort of institutions are most incentivized to do, how do we actually undertake data science that explicitly centers and serves and empowers women at the margins? And so we try to, you know, again, like this was also one of our goals of not trying to be, it's hard to be constantly talking about oppression or exposing oppression without thinking about how do we get out of this. And the reality is there are actually people who are modeling this right now as we speak. And we really tried to use the book to showcase powerful work that's being done in this space. And so one of the people and projects that we showcase at the end is the work of Kimberly Seals Allers, along with her 15-year-old son, Michael, as an example of a data-driven project that really centers women and has an intersectional take on women and on data science and technology. And this connects back with our discussion of birth and reproductive justice as well. So she's kickstarted and has raised a bunch of money. Like I think now they've raised around $500,000 for this company, a sort of social entrepreneurship company called Earth. And so what Earth is a app as well as a platform. And it's named Earth because it's like birth, but it's the B for bias has been taken out. So if you know Kimberly, she's like a force in reproductive justice. And she is, has really been pressing for sort of studies and looks into bias in the healthcare system being not an insignificant contributor, for example, to the disparities that we see in Black maternal mortality. And so how might we design something that removes that bias from the birth process? Basically you can think about Earth, this app, as a kind of an intersectional Yelp for birth experiences. So if you're a woman who is a trans, Black, disabled woman, and you want to know that you're going to be treated with care by your care providers, and who are the culturally competent doctors or midwives or lactation consultants or doulas, this is a place where people basically can crowdsource your experiences and find providers that are going to be sensitive to you. And a wide range of providers, so not just, not just like the OBs, but also nurses in the hospital, staff, and things like that. And so it's about that kind of just sort of individual level, find a caregiver. But then she has big plans for this as an accountability tool as well, and has thought about ways to use the data that's been collected to then share that back with the hospitals to press for more systematic change at the structure of these different organizations. And so she's started this. I think they've done some pilots so far in a couple different cities in the US. It's really just a very emerging thing, but really, I think just so powerful, and also in the way that it values women's and non-binary people's experiences and stories of their birth and how they were treated by the system in this kind of whole realm of data science. So we wanted to end with sort of what does this look like to do things differently? Okay. Yeah. Lauren, what are you doing?
Yeah, so that's sort of it. So just to sum up, this chapter and this principle about examining power begins by just looking closely at how power works in the world today. We think it's a really important step. The next chapter will be about challenging power, but you really do need to understand power in a fine-grained way in order to intervene. It involves asking these who questions about data science. So data science by whom, data science for whom, data science with whose interests and goals in mind. It looks at individuals, it looks at groups, it looks at institutions, it looks at society across sort of all levels of social configurations and then all levels of the matrix of domination. It really attends to this idea of the privilege hazard, this idea that science that reflects the people who sort of represent the dominant groups in society are often unaware and therefore just sort of not thinking about how those same projects might not work for or actively harm other groups. And as I said before, I already said this already, but the goal is first to understand and then to challenge and change the status quo. And so we'll talk about that next week, sort of more examples of intervention. And we just wanted to end, Catherine, you should talk about this one because you know about these groups better than I do.
Oh yeah, okay. One of our other favorite sections, feminist shout out. So just a note, if you want us to shout out your group, please just get in touch with us on Twitter or email or something. We're happy to showcase various participants' work here. But we thought, because we're talking a lot about reproductive justice and data science this week, we do a shout out to some of the most amazing groups that center Black mothers and reproductive justice. So there's the Black Mothers Breastfeeding Association, which is based in Detroit, but has a national scale agenda. They do really amazing work to reduce racial inequalities in breastfeeding support for families. They do things like run hackathons, design policy, do direct service provision, and run these like amazing, inspiring, joyful groups. And then an emerging, like really, I think pretty big political force at this point is the Black Mamas Matter Alliance, which is a newer group, but I would just say go visit their website. It's beautiful. And so their mission is that they envision a world where Black mamas have the rights, respect, resources to thrive before, during, and after pregnancy. And so just, one of the things that we want to just kind of name here is that a lot of what Serena Williams' story highlights and a lot of what the numbers around maternal mortality highlight are these very severe racial disparities in maternal mortality. But to remember to think about, there was a great essay that came out by 4 prominent Black maternal health scholars, and the title of their essay was An Inconvenient Truth. You have no answer that Black women don't already possess. So just thinking about when we're talking about maternal mortality, to think about how do we really center the people that are the most impacted, uplift the work that's already being done sort of in communities, and really make space for people to lead in those areas. So that's our feminist shout out of the week. And now we have like a little bit of time for some questions, which we'll go to the Q&A and see what are the most upvoted questions. Lauren, did you?
Okay, sure. So this is a question about the privilege hazard, focusing on people who are unaware. This is from Sarah Rodriguez. And they say, working in design and data, I've run across people on the front line and in policy who are aware of these biases, but continue to accept them because of underlying racism, apathy, or self-preservation, sort of not wanting to make things harder on themselves. This is more intentional. I wonder how you'd recommend addressing that, since it's more intentional versus someone being unaware. You know, I think this is an example of, I mean, I think this is like true and real, and we've all seen it, and this is a great question. I mean, I think this is actually where this sort of feminist killjoy role becomes really salient, bringing in multiple here, right? You know, someone needs to speak what is happening, and it's really important that, you know, that I think that the issue be spoken, that it not be left sort of unstated and therefore unaddressed. But I think it needs to be done in a couple of ways. One, it shouldn't always be the person who represents the group that is the direct example of the oppression that is, you know, being furthered by the project. It shouldn't fall on them to be the person to speak up all the time. So, you know, if, you know, I feel like I am a woman, but I'm a white woman. And so if I recognize that there's an instance of racism, you know, I'm able-bodied, so, you know, issue of ableism taking place, you know, if there are instances when you can sort of take the pressure off that other person and be the one to try to say like, hey, this is an issue, you know, that's a role that you can take on and sort of absorb some of the killjoy mantle, so that someone else doesn't need to take it. And I think this is also something that I think about a lot, you know, as someone who's from New York, who's not always the most tactful as one could be, but trying to think about the best ways for the culture in which you are placed, to sort of be able to speak that truth and that reality, but in a way that will not sort of create an adversarial type relationship, but will actually sort of further the larger goals, which are to have everyone on board with the shared goal of not perpetuating these forces. And I think that really does reflect the particular culture and context that you're in, sort of how you raise issues and how you lead or sort of try to shape the attitudes of the people that you're working with. I don't know, Catherine, if you have other things to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I think it's a great answer. And, you know, I mean, it's, I totally feel this question, and I feel like I've encountered this kind of thing a lot, because if we're really focused on anti-oppression work, it's really hard, you know, and it's hard even when, like me, I embody a lot of dominant identities, and it's very difficult. Like, it's difficult for me to see outside my own privilege hazard, right? And it's tremendously hard work to then engage with people in various kinds of conversations as well. So, you know, I think what Lauren is saying is thinking about like how, especially when we embody dominant positions, we can be better allies and accomplices to folks. Like, how as a white person can I stand up or speak out against racism or against ableism, et cetera, in my space. But, you know, also I would say like all strategies apply. So also things like doing lots of back channel, backdoor kind of things to promote various kinds of equity in the organization. And then also creating shared spaces where organizational norms can start to be changed. Because a lot of this, you know, a lot of the reason people are apathetic is because they're not incentivized. A lot of or they want to protect themselves, or they see this as a dangerous political choice for their career to speak out. And so, you know, we can work to try to create those spaces where we would actually change the norms within some kind of institution. And again, that's like, it's long-term work. Like, that doesn't happen overnight. It's like bringing people along little by little, but especially if you can find allies and you can start to like be introducing terms and conversations and you know, introducing a new vocabulary. I think that's super powerful work, and that's also work that can happen in any sort of collective context. And we
So we're
might
almost
be
out of time, but maybe we could just do one more. Do you want to set the next question?
Okay, yeah. So the next question is from Rebecca, and says, I checked back on your footnote 38, mentions Meredith Broussard's book, Artificial Intelligence, great book. As you write, she argues that AI is often not the most efficient, effective, or adequate solution to a problem. So Rebecca works at the intersection of technology, science, and human rights, and has noticed how we've all encountered this phenomenon where technology is incorporated into human rights work, but doesn't really serve the communities we are working for. So how do you suggest approaching techno-chauvinism at work? I don't know, Lauren, if you want to take the first step.
I mean, I feel like I have no, I don't have a great like holistic, you know, ta-da, here's the answer. But I think that what I'm always advocating for is looking, you know, advocating for the idea that nothing is a zero-sum game, right? That, you know, one thing doesn't need to, it's like, you know, you don't need to not use one thing because you're using another thing. And really what you need to do is identify what each method gains you and then what each method doesn't show, and then try to bring together the advantages of all of these different approaches in a way that doesn't make it feel like if you're advocating for one, you're not advocating for another. I think maybe I'll just stop there because we're running short on time and ask Catherine if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the thing I would think about that is, you know, thinking about how you can intervene. I mean, like intervene on this situation. So like the situation is that there's a lot of money for AI and there's a lot of money for technology. And this kind of work is seen as being data driven, is seen as sort of higher level. You know, there are funders more willing to make investments. So again, like I think like the sort of political economy of like why is this happening needs to be taken into account. And so what I would sort of advocate is instead of, you know, sort of participating in such a thing where you then like foist some unwanted technology on people, at least a thing that I've been working on and doing in my own research is thinking about how developing data and AI and technology you can operate as a kind of a Trojan horse. So like it can serve as a way to get you some funding, but actually what you can do is run on the ground participatory design and workshops and do more of a co-design model or a participatory design model or something. Like I think there are ways to design such projects so that it could come from bottom up. And then the solution that people come up with might be, we don't need your stinking AI, you know, and then like supporting a world in which that would be okay, right? Like, so not predetermining that like this is a problem that could and should be addressed with AI. So I mean, that's like one way that I would advocate for kind of circumventing that while also potentially introducing, I would say, more solid democratic and participatory methods into the development of technology. Because a lot of times what happens is just like these blanket tech solutions are seen as a kind of efficient way to address something, where if you actually do even just a tiny bit of work on the ground, it's not what people want, it's not what people will use. So there's like adoption problems and so on. So anyway, that's just a thought. Yeah, so I think we should probably go. Oh yeah, thanks. There's so many great comments. So okay, we're really looking forward to reading all the rest of the chat. We're looking forward to continuing the conversation on Twitter and on any other, like in Google Docs and other docs and any things that folks set up. And yeah, we will be seeing you in 1 week from today, where we'll read chapter 2. So this chapter is all about examining power, but we can't just examine power because we know we have to actually take steps to challenge power. And so that's what we're going to be talking about next.
And I think also some of the questions that people had may be answered in chapter 2.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Hang in there.
Bye. Okay. It's still recording, right? Yeah. Okay. Lauren, I'm going to stop the record.
Okay, thank you.